Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head-to-head for the last chicken wing. Shop game day faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot. We charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic, and today I am going to be talking to Rahul Desai. He is a writer and film critic who has written for newspapers such as The Hindu, Are, Open Magazine and First Post. He has been professionally reviewing films since 2013 and has a dedicated film companion byline since 2016. The reason I really wanted to talk to Rahul was because we met at a film festival in Norway, in Tromsø, and note my perfect Norwegian pronunciation. And we talked about how films intersect life, not insect life, but intersect life, unless you're watching a David Cronenberg film, in which case films insect life, of course they do. And I was particularly interested in how he was going about this in terms of his columns, and so I really wanted to talk to him. I also wanted to talk to him because Indian cinema is very much a blind spot for me. It's very much one of those holes that I have. Well, you will hear me explain during the podcast, so I won't reiterate it now or anticipate what I'm going to say. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like and to subscribe. This is our 94th episode. It's been a wonderful trip so far. I hope you've enjoyed it. By all means, feel free to go back and listen to any of the earlier episodes. There are no paywalls. There's no Patreon. I've only recently put adverts in just to cover my subscription fees for the various services that I need to use to put out the podcast. But it's really more to have these conversations online. This is my motivation. Partly I get paid by the fact that I have really interesting conversations with really interesting people such as Rahul, and that in itself I would quite happily pay to have that experience every week. Have a really good, some people do therapy, I do film conversations. But there is a huge back catalogue of great guests. And the other great thing about the podcast, to blow my own trumpet for 5 seconds, is that it's not really necessarily topical, in the sense that people have written these books to last for years, to last for decades, hopefully. And so they are... It doesn't matter when you listen to the episode, they'll still be relevant to their subject. So by all means, go back and pick through some of our back catalogue. Okay, that's enough of me wittering on about nothing in particular. The more important thing is for me to thank Elliot Atkins for the music, Ali Harwood for the artwork, and thank you, listener, and enjoy the episode.
So basically my primary job is a weekly film critic. I review Hindi films for this website called Film Companion. So I do my reviews every week, but at the same time, I have a column on the side, which I do fortnightly. Mm-hmm. I started it back in 2015 or so. I was writing for this newspaper called The Hindu, which is big publication in India, and from 2015 to 2020 I was doing a column where basically it's an intersection of films and life, and more of a culture column than a cinema column, so to say, but it's basically just sort of investigating my own relationship with cinema over the years, and a lot of personal essays, a lot of film meets life meets film columns. From till 2020 till around the time COVID struck, I was doing that column for The Hindu, and it became a different column for another publication called News9. It was called Focal Point. So I did that for like a year and a half, so that's pretty much the gist of my column. That's the sort of writing I'm really primarily interested in, and obviously reviewing teaches me a lot about the craft itself. But that's the sort of writing I want to pursue, because at some point I plan to maybe write a novel, a fiction novel.
That's what I really sort of excited me about talking to you in the context of the podcast, because we were talking about. So you're the first writer on film that I've got whose book is in the future.
It is in the future, and I'm just convinced that if I keep saying it, it'll happen. And so that I don't sleep on it for forever. But to be honest, I know it sounds a little weird, but I'm actually waiting to live a little more before I write that book, because it's sort of semi-memoir and autofiction almost. So I have something in mind, but I'm just waiting to get a little older before I write it, because I don't think I'm ready yet.
You need a little bit more life.
Yes.
That's an admirable bit of restraint on your part, because there are plenty of people who just sort of plow straight onto the writing without living their life. So how did your sort of love of cinema start then? How does that, to sort of key it into your life as you do in your writing?
So I think, like many I know, I'm an accidental critic. In the sense, I didn't know it existed as a profession for the longest time. I didn't know you could make a living out of writing. I started pretty late, and I know this for a fact that you started late, because I just read your piece recently. And but in terms of a career myself, at least in terms of what people do here, I started pretty late, because I have a science background in college. I majored in statistics. I was going to go the conventional way, sort of looking for a job in market research and stuff. I did that for around a month before I realized that I can't sit in a cubicle all my life. And it just I felt like one of those movie characters where you get existential and you just run out of the office and never come back, which is literally what I did. And then I sort of just it's a cliche, but then I just started watching a lot of movies. I started attending a few film festivals in Mumbai. which is where I'm based. And
Have you always
once
been
I
in
sta-
Have you always been in Mumbai?
No, I actually grew up in a city called Ahmedabad
Mm.
in the state of Gujarat, which is on the western coast. I was there. I did my schooling there. I moved to Mumbai when I was around 16 or 17. So more than half my life I've been here now. So this is more home than my hometown now. So yeah, I did my college in Mumbai, and after sort of just spending a year just watching films and attending a few film festivals, I decided that this could be sort of a career. So that's how I wanted to. I knew I wanted to become some sort of writer because when I was in school, I used to love writing essays quite a lot. I used to hate every other subject, but I was pretty good, at least for my age, when I used to write these letters and essays and summaries. So I thought that maybe I could write in the future, but I didn't know what kind of writing I wanted to do. I initially thought I'll become a screenwriter, and that's what I studied for. In fact, I did a course for a year on filmmaking in after my degree year, and that's how I started. Basically, I got into the industry more or less. I started assisting writers. I started assisting directors, doing odd jobs basically for 3 or 4 years. I was drifting about before one of my friends put me onto a film blog called upperstall.com, which basically writes about a lot of Indian cinema, and it's a sort of free thing. So I just started writing. I just started reviewing films for them on the side, thinking that I'm going to get free movie tickets. I'm just going to maybe attend screenings. Yeah, so yeah, that's how I started reviewing films on the side. I thought, I'm going to just sort of be in touch with the kind of cinema that's releasing out there. What started as sort of almost a freeloading gig then soon became a very integral part of my life, because then once I started reviewing films more often, writing about films more often, I thought that this is what I want to do. Because so a lot of people here, what they do is they first become film critics and then get into the film industry, say as writers or directors. I think I went the opposite way. I started out wanting to be a screenwriter and ended up becoming a film critic, because I started I really got into the entire practice of watching movies every week and writing about them, and discovering a lot about myself as well, because it really helped me get in touch with who I was as a person. As odd as it sounds, writing about film, I guess, or writing about any kind of art does that. So more than watching a lot of movies, I also enjoyed writing about them just as much, and I started educating myself like most self-taught critics, I guess. It's more or less the same journey. It's just that yeah, it took me a little longer to get there.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you say about how it sort of becomes a form of self-education as well, because there's that thing of like, if you're not a film critic, if you're just watching movies casually, which is there isn't much difference in terms of, if you watch films and you think about them, then you're becoming a film critic regardless. But the one difference I would say for a film critic is you're kind of forced to watch any film. It's not like you're not just following your enthusiasms. So you have to sit and think, okay, I don't usually like musicals, but I've got to learn how they work and what happens and what makes a good musical, what makes a bad musical, because otherwise I'm not doing my readers, I'm not doing the film itself any I'm not doing it justice if I'm just sitting there going, ugh, musical rubbish, by the way, I love musicals, and that was just the first thing that came to mind.
No, I totally and I absolutely agree with that, because I think I think film criticism and writing about film in general is about what you do in between the things you really want to do, right? Like it's like a lot of other jobs are the same in art, are the same. It's about how you're spending the days in between your good days, and we don't get to watch great films every single week. And I see a lot of people on the outside saying, oh wow, you have a great job, you get paid to write about movies. I was like, yeah, I mean, I will not begrudge my job, I love my job, but a lot of it is trying to find a new language to basically write about the same kind of films or different kinds of films. As you said, films you may not want to watch on a particular week, in a particular month, genres you don't like. So that sort of education that you give yourself, and the fact that you have to do it because it is your job in a way, that for me is the core of film criticism, because I find myself learning a lot more when I actually end up writing about films I don't want to write about. When I don't have much to say and I'm trying to find a different way to say the same thing, that okay, this film is just bland. It's just, how many different ways can you say that in? What new language can you find to engage the reader and to engage yourself as a thinker? And for me, I think, especially because I review Hindi cinema week in and week out, and I review, like, on an average, I review like 3 films a week here. So because there are so many films coming out, I think 80 or 90% of them, like any other film industry, is below average or mediocre or terrible. And that's when I find myself tested maximum as a writer or as a professional, because that's the unglamorous part of the job that nobody sees. And I guess the Fablemans and the big films that we keep hearing about in awards, in sort of award season, that doesn't happen often enough. And when it does happen, when you do watch a film that inspires you to write about it, or that inspires me to maybe say something personal about it, that I connected to it personally, when it does happen, you have to be alert enough to catch it, because by then you're sort of almost beaten into submission by a lot of other work you're doing in the week, a lot of other trash you may not want to write about, but you're doing because you must. And but then you need to be constantly focused enough to know that when that moment comes, you need to catch it and make the most of it, because that's the writing people will read years from now and look back on when they think about you as a critic. And that's the writing that matters. But to get there, you have to keep doing a lot of stuff you don't want to.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and it's I think it can be true as well. I find film festivals like this, because I think, at film festivals you might have 2 or 3 days where you're watching 4 films a day. And you might have 2 or 3 days where you don't see anything that you particularly like. And it's not even that, the things that, as you say, beat you into submission are not necessarily the bad films. It's kind of the okay films, the things that you don't have anything. It's fine. It's, I mean, that's kind of the hardest review to write, is there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay, but it's not exciting or new or anything like that. And I would put the Fablemans in that category, by the way.
Yeah, I know we talked about this. I remember that. But yeah, just to give you a very off the cuff example. But yeah, I mean, it is that the middling ones are the toughest to write about. But what it does is, by the time Friday comes around and say by chance you watch a very good film that nobody's heard about, it could be at a film festival, it could be anywhere. You're mentally a little tired, you're psychologically almost out of the week, you're looking forward to a Sunday to just sort of recharge yourself. But then you realize that you have to write this piece, because this is the time, this is the moment, and this is what you were probably waiting for a whole week without realizing it. And that I find difficult most of the time, because we have like 1 or 2 big films. When I say big films, I don't mean good films. The films that everyone, the mainstream blockbusters, even in Bollywood and Hindi cinema, say once in 2 months is a spectacle sort of film. It more or less turns out to be bad. But the thing is, as a critic, you have to keep remembering that that's the only review that people will read. And that's the only review, that's the only piece that people will judge you by. So by the time that film comes around, you've done probably 20 other pieces in that week alone, and you're wondering that you're wondering how unfair it is that by the time you've reached that piece, the big film that everyone's dying to read about, you're almost out of steam. So for me, it's always about having to temper sort of rhythm through the month and sort of building up to a film that that everyone's going to read about, and your work is going to be judged by. I always find it difficult to sort of stay on the ball when the big film comes around.
So talking of big films, so hasn't there just been? And you're going to have to be going to have to be very forgiving with my ignorance in terms of Indian cinema. We've already talked about this a little bit as well. There was a big film came out like last week, right?
Yeah, it's called Pathan. It's a massive film in mainstream Hindi cinema, which everyone knows as Bollywood. And as it turns out, when Pathan released, I was in Norway. and I'm like, what will this do to my career? Because this is literally the biggest film of the year, and I'm millions of miles away, and this is literally the only piece everyone's been. This is only the only film people want to read about right now, and that's the only film that maybe you have something to say about. So as soon as I came back from Norway, I immediately went to the hall the same day and watched Pathan. And ended up writing about it a week late. It was a very satisfying experience because I didn't have a deadline, number one, and second, I could just sort of do almost a post-mortem and include the reaction and include the sort of the reaction to Pathan, which everyone's talking about, because it is the biggest film we've had in years. It's not just post-pandemic Bollywood. It's been breaking records across the world. And it also stars, it also features one of the biggest superstars that we've had, Shah Rukh Khan. So, and it's his comeback after like 4.5 years of doing no films, because he did a bunch of not very good films in the last decade. And people wondered if he had the same kind of star power anymore, if he was going to come back as an actor. And he's 57 already. But, he came back with a very typically silly, smart sort of action blockbuster that you'd see someone like Tom Cruise owning in sort of Top Gun Maverick. The context is more or less the same, because it's almost the old school superstar coming back and reminding people that he's still around and he can still do things that the young generation can't do. And I think the entire narrative around Pathan has become bigger than the film itself, because to be honest, the film itself is pretty stupid. It's just that people are enjoying it. Because I guess people needed it at this point, and people wanted to see something that reminded them of not just pre-pandemic India, but say India of the 90s or India of the 2000s. And I guess I guess a lot of factors came together to make Pathan such a big hit. And as we speak, it's still sort of doing pretty well. And I'm quite surprised by it, because when I watched the film, I'm like, I get it. It's not the film. It's far more than that.
I mean, in a way, that the parallel with Top Gun Maverick continues, because I think Top Gun Maverick is a fairly, I mean, it's okay, it's okay, it's fine. Some of the action sequences, especially the last half hour, are superb, and I love the craft of it and all the rest of it. But there are, I mean, every time they're not in an airplane, that film sort of really grinds to a halt. And, they seem to spend like 3 days in the bar at the beginning of the movie. And it's like, this scene is just not going anywhere.
Yeah, no.
You had a similar reaction to Top Gun, or how was your?
I mean, it's pretty much the same thing, because the bar scene that you're talking about, I was like, that's a pretty long setup for an action film, and I'm like, okay, I was obviously the first Top Gun actually released the year I was born. Right. So by the time I'd watched it, I was well into my sort of teens. So I watched it pretty late. And so I never really got the hype about the first one, because I watched it way after it released. So by the time the second one came around, I really went in with absolutely not only zero expectations, negative expectations, because I like, I've been watching the Mission Impossible movies most of my life. So I didn't expect this to be any different. But as you said, the last half an hour I don't think I've had a better time at the movies in the last year. It felt like that, and all the scenes in the plane and all the scenes, sort of all the action sequences were just so well crafted. But again, a very clunky, awkward setup. It's the same as Pathan. It's when people are speaking, and when you're supposed to basically, when the story is supposed to move along, when there's a narrative sort of trying to emerge from the rubble of the action, it's very awkward, like most action films. But yeah, you take it as at face value. And I eventually, given that the last half an hour was so engaging, I sort of came out with a smile on my face.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you say about action cinema and like that context in which you initially see it, because I remember I was in my early teens when Top Gun came out. And so I'm very old compared to you. and so I was in that state. I'd gone beyond the sort of Indiana Jones stuff of my youth, and you know, I'd enjoyed all that action cinema. That was to me the golden age.
Yeah.
And the 80s with Top Gun and Rambo and sort of then Arnold Schwarzenegger emerging, action movies had sort of become this kind of Reaganite American political thing that it was almost kind of like, especially in Britain, I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, but if you liked films, these were films to just absolutely dismiss. They're just like, oh, they're these crazy right-wing nonsense. Especially, you know, Rambo 2 and Rambo 3 were specifically sort of like, you know, this was a decade of Red Dawn as well, the John Milius film, of course.
Yeah.
So even though I'm the kind of guy who should be the target audience for this film in terms of being nostalgic towards it, I guess. My nostalgia wasn't there. It was just I was like, well, isn't this a like military propaganda bullshit sort of thing? So I didn't come at it with, and well, I've already said it. I don't need to repeat it. I enjoyed the last bit. I enjoyed the planes bit, but also from a political point of view, it's just like, you know, oh, look at these huge airplanes, and let's pretend that America isn't the greater superpower technologically by inventing some mysterious magic other plane that people have, you know.
That's what I was curious about, actually, because I mean, the lens of the action film can only take you so far, which was most evident in Top Gun Maverick, and about the military propaganda lens, which was so obvious, because when I saw the Oscar nominations, I was like, oh, it's cute how they're trying to balance Top Gun Maverick with All Quiet at the Western Front, which is basically an anti-war film in the same lineup. And I'm like, that's pretty designed on itself. And so when I came out of Top Gun Maverick, I was like, that was absolutely mind-blowing, the last half an hour. And funnily enough, as it often happens when you have to write about these films, after enjoying them or after not enjoying them, that's when a lot of these themes start to dawn on you. And that's when you start to realize that, did I just enjoy the spectacle? Was there anything more to that than that? Because the same thing happened to a lot of us while we were writing about RRR, which was probably the biggest Indian film in the last decade or so. And given its spread, I'm guessing a lot of writers went through the same process, because it's one thing enjoying it in the moment, which I did with all these action films that we are talking about. But when you get down to writing about it, you start obviously having to reflect on a lot of themes within the film, because you, beyond the one line saying that, you know, the craft is amazing and the plane sequence or the interval sequence in RRR is amazing, then you have to go deeper than that, and that's when a lot of these themes emerge. And I guess that's why, also to put it in context, a lot of people are cheering for the success of the film within India too, because politically it's a very important film. It's not about what's happening in the film so much. It's about who is starring in the film. Shah Rukh Khan is a superstar, but he's also a Muslim superstar, and he's and he currently occupies a country that has a right-wing government, and sort of there's a lot of Hindu propaganda been going on in a lot of action films and patriotic films in the last 10 or 15 years. So basically, there was a lot riding on Pathan in that sense, because if the audience had rejected this film, it would be pretty obvious that India isn't the secular country it is so proud of being. And it's actually that the right-wing government has sort of really sort of dug its claws into the masses more than they've realized. But the success of Pathan basically proves that a Muslim superstar can still win audiences over, no matter how much propaganda the government itself is spreading through the kind of films they've been platforming, through the kind of films they've been promoting. And that's why I guess that's Pathan is more of a sort of political success than cinematic or an artistic success. And I'm guessing that's why it's given us a lot of liberals, a lot of writers, a lot of artists who are inherently liberals, a lot of hope, because even though the film itself isn't great, I think it's a nice little sort of snapshot of the future that says that, it's not only right-wing films that are going to be doing well. I think everyone still has a platform.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an interesting context, because we had a conversation which I'd like to revisit a little bit. In that, I was telling you that my ignorance of Indian film is fairly profound. I mean, I have I've watched the Indian films that are on the sort of Sight and Sound Best 250 list. One of which I think is directed by Jean Renoir, so I'm not sure if that counts necessarily. The popularity of RRR, is it Rise, Revolt, Revolution, or Rise, Revolt?
Yeah, something like that. I think it is, because I mean, after a while, I lost track of the initials, but RRR.
That was hugely popular internationally, and it's been hugely popular with, I'm sure people listening to this, there'll be a fair few who are putting it on their top 10 lists. And I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it the way I enjoyed John Woo movies from the 1990s, the Hong Kong movies, The Killer, Hard Boiled, that sort of thing. But I did have like a nagging suspicion that we were all missing something, or we were all, we were all willing to give it way too much of a pass, or not to educate ourselves basically into the background. So could you give us a little bit of the background of it, of why this might be a more problematic film seen from the Indian context?
Yeah, so I mean, RRR obviously massive spectacle and very enjoyable, at face value. I enjoyed it. I loved watching it. When I was watching it, I felt like, I'd come back to the movies after a long time. And I'll be honest, when even when I was writing about, so RRR is basically a Telugu film. Telugu is a South Indian sort of totally separate film industry, which churns out a lot of mainstream action films every year, and their action films are actually probably some of the biggest Indian films almost every year. It's very different from the Hindi film industry, which is Bollywood. So let's just call it Tollywood for now. But given that RRR is from that industry, which is an entirely different culture, I think a lot of us Hindi film writers, the critics who write about Bollywood films, also, at least personally.
Explaining football to the friend who's just there for the nachos? Hard. Tailgating from home like a pro with snacks and drinks everyone will love? An easy win. And with Instacart helping deliver the snack time MVPs to your door, you're ready for the game in as fast as 30 minutes. So you never miss a play or lose your seat on the couch or have to go head to head for the last chicken wing. Shop Game Day Faves on Instacart and enjoy $0 delivery fees on your first 3 grocery orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Other fees and terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
I missed a lot of subtext myself. A lot of problematic sort of undertones were pointed out by the film critics from the south of India, the ones who actually have grown up in the region where films like RRR have been doing well for years. So they were the ones who actually started the discourse. And it then slowly started spreading across India. And more people started talking about it on social media, and that's when I caught onto it as well. Because when I watched it the second time when it dropped on Netflix, I started realizing that sure, the spectacle is great, but like any great action film, there is more to what the filmmaker may have been subconsciously saying, or what he may be deliberately, quite obviously putting forward. In my opinion, it was subconscious, but the background is that there's a lot of subtext about Hindu mythology. See, in that in itself isn't a problem, but given that we are in 2023, we are in a right-wing country where Hindu majoritarianism is on the rise, where Hindutva, basically the right-wing government has been propagating Hindutva and erasure of all of the other religions and minorities. Given that we live in that kind of atmosphere, the undertones of the Hindu mythology, and especially the last 30 minutes of RRR, where you see them sort of almost metamorphose into mythological figures from Hindu mythology. One of them becomes Ram. And it becomes this almost fantastical film after being about basically a very large-scale bromance. That's when you start to realize that the filmmaker may have been sort of almost loading his film with the kind of subtext that a lot of us have been wary about. It's just that he's managed to conceal it better than a lot of other big budget or mainstream filmmakers from India, because he is so skilled. There's no doubt about it. He's probably the best director of action set pieces we've had in decades. But the fact that there was even as far as the subtext of say the era it was set in, basically the freedom fighting era against the British. I think a lot of the more liberal freedom fighters and the more secular freedom fighters, say like Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, who everyone is familiar with, and a few others, a lot of them were erased or were curiously absent from the film as symbols. What was basically present were symbols of the more violent freedom fighters, of the more radical sort of freedom fighters. And these are things that you only pick up, after you sort of enjoy the film at face value and watch it the second time. And that's when even I made it a point to watch it again and to see what everyone from the South was talking about. And even I caught on to things. But by then, obviously, RRR has spread by like wildfire across the globe. And I don't believe it is necessary to always look at a film in context of the region it's from or in context of the country it's from, because it's impossible, because every film is inherently from somewhere, and there is always going to be something that, say, a foreigner or someone from an entirely different culture will not get. And maybe they aren't supposed to. Maybe they are supposed to look at the film as an action spectacle, which it's brilliant at doing. But at the same time, I'm glad that discourse like this sort of at least starts a conversation about whether films like this are actually problematic, or whether maybe the director isn't putting a lot of sinister tones compared to what we've seen in the last decade, especially in Hindi cinema, because they've been very blatant about a lot of Hinduism and Hindu scriptures and Hindu mythology in a lot of nationalistic films we've been making in the last decade. But RRR, I'd say, is a little more subtle compared to that still. It's something that maybe only a particular subsection of people can pick up on and then maybe talk about it. I was very engaged in the discourse. I didn't have an opinion for the longest time. I'll still maintain I very much enjoyed the film, but if you really want to sort of look at it, there are problematic undertones to it, and it really depends on where you come from and what you want to take away from that film.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, it's the same thing. When I was just to go back to Top Gun in a way, as a way of
Yeah.
sort of illustrating how I think about that. You know, through the 80s, there's Clint Eastwood making these Dirty Harry movies. There's and each Dirty Harry movie is becoming increasingly Reaganite and increasingly right wing. You're having the Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Sylvester Stallone muscle off with a very obvious sort of. And it's not actually until, say, Die Hard that you deflate that sort of pumped up steroidy masculinity, and you have now all the way through that these films are making massive dollar, and there are and anybody who's pointing out, isn't this just like a propagandistic sort of stuff, is obviously being sort of categorized as a killjoy or whatever. But nowadays, you would never look back at those films without thinking, oh, isn't it interesting how this was the Rocky IV? You know, I mean, there's no subtext in Rocky IV. It's on the poster, you know, he's draped in an American flag on the poster. No problems with spoilers. He's obviously victorious on the poster as well. And so given enough time, everybody is like, oh yeah, we can talk about this in this context. I don't think going and taking this forward to RRR, I don't think that it's necessarily. I think we have this sort of internet-infused vocabulary of critical appreciation these days. You know, we talk about the discourse, and we talk about something being problematic, and problematic in itself is a really interesting word, because it seems to be a placeholder for argument. It seems to be like, I'll just say something is problematic, but we won't actually get into, you know, we won't necessarily go into that. And my interest is not necessarily in a film being agreeing with me or disagreeing with me, or having propaganda for the right or for the left or for the middle. It's more, let's just not depoliticize stuff. I mean, it's political. Let's just put our cards on the table. And I can now watch the Rambo films, the Dirty Harry films, and say, what a bunch of right-wing trash from an ideological point of view, but also that's a lot of fun here and a lot of fun there, you know. But I think the problem in specifically with a Western approach to RRR is just like, oh, it comes from another place. They can't possibly have politics beyond sort of imperialism, beyond a reaction to British imperialism or West. Well, you know, here's a news flash. India, I'm sure you don't know this, Rahul, so it'll come as news to you, but India has a complicated political culture and all the rest of it. The biggest democracy in the world. I'm sure you're glad I'm explaining that to you.
No, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I can see that a lot of the discourse in the West can sometimes be dismissive of, you know, the spectacles that actually cross over, you know, say like a Crouching Tiger did like 20 years ago. I mean, you know, it's a very exoticized worldview, and it's something that even we in India are guilty of. You know, we look at Western films a certain way as well. You know, for example, I mean, a lot of us are still not willing to believe that a film like Forrest Gump had its issues, and was a distinctly Republican worldview. And it's only after basically, obviously living a little, obviously reading a little, watching a lot of movies, that you come to your sort of conclusion. But you know, as people who obviously are within the discourse, whether you like it or not, and whether we've been consuming it day in, day out on Twitter and social media, I guess the biggest challenge is to sort of really segregate our ability to, say, enjoy a film for what it is, and then judge a film for its politics, because every film is political Even the most personal films, a memoir is political. It represents, like, a Steven Spielberg film. It represents a certain kind of Americanism that is very distinct in its politics. So I guess every artist has a political point of view, whether they want to admit it or not, and it's all visible in their work. So as people who watch these films and write about these films, I always find it fascinating, because every year I'm sort of evolving into a different kind of writer or a kind of thinker, where I'm wondering that, okay, this film is it has its politics a little skewed, but god damn, that was really enjoyable. And that happens quite often, and you can't say it most of the time, because you're going to be pounced on. As you said, there's the internet language that's out there. You can't really say it without actually digging deep into your feelings about how much a film should affect you, on what level it should affect you, whether you're okay with disagreeing with its politics and at the same time enjoying its craft. And the answer is never simple. It's always complicated. And I guess that's why that's why I consider it like a tough thing to do, but also such a rewarding thing to do, because I feel like we become smarter after every review we do, because we are battling our own biases and prejudices with every piece, and with every podcast we do, with every conversation we have. And we get maybe a little more clearer or a little more muddled in our thinking after that. And I think films like RRR and Top Gun and Pathan, I think they take us a little closer to the kind of approach we might want to have towards the cinema we watch, and personally, politically, culturally, in every way possible. And I watch a lot of old films, like you said. I watch Rocky films almost all the time now. Like at least once a year, I'm watching a Rocky film. I'm watching Forrest Gump every other year, and I know that it's there are issues now, and I sometimes curse the fact that I'm old enough to recognize those issues and not enjoy the film like I once used to as a kid. But it is and that's what cinema is. That's what art is. It's supposed to make you feel complicated emotions, and I guess these films bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, absolutely. I love rewatching those movies, and it can happen with so-called sort of it happens with all kinds of cinema. I recently rewatched Raging Bull, and I found that so hard to watch. And it's obvious, it's a wonderfully made film, it's a wonderfully performed film, and what was difficult was I couldn't get over just how awful he is. And obviously that's the point. It's a portrait in a damaged man, and how a man who's causing a lot of damage. And I get all that, I get it, but it was almost like sort of looking through the window at the apartment opposite, where a man is beating his wife and not being able to do anything about it, and just thinking, just a very viscerally unpleasant feeling. And I think the first time I watched that film, when I was 14, 15, I would have been, look at how he shoots the boxing scenes, look at how beautiful the black and white is. And Kathy Moriarty's character, who is the sort of the heart of the film, and who is brilliantly portrayed by the actress, and quite well handled by the film, she's almost like the most interesting. Well, she is the most interesting character in a way. But yeah. Well, in terms of your, you said at the beginning, we were talking about how you were doing these columns where you connect your life. What was the first film that you sort of wrote about in that way?
I guess the first film I wrote about that way was Nebraska.
Oh, right. The Alexander Payne.
Yes. I think back in 2014, I wasn't writing this. I was just reviewing. I just, in fact, started professionally reviewing then. So I was getting a little exhausted reviewing stuff that I didn't want to most of the time. So I had my own blog, and I was like, okay, on the weekends, obviously, like most of like probably everyone else, I watched the films I really wanted to, and Nebraska was one of them because the theme really interested me because it hit very close to home because it's about a father who had a drinking problem and a son, an adult son who's grown up, who's driving him across the state. And to me, I don't know what it was. I had no plan to do it, but because my father, while growing up, was an alcoholic. He had problems. He had problems, sort of holding on to jobs and stuff like that. While watching the film, I got a lot of, as it turns out, I got a lot of flashbacks of my own childhood, and there were a lot of scenes, moments in the film that reminded me, directly about the experiences I went through. The way, the way he looks in the film as well. There was a certain way, he carried himself that reminded me a lot of physical aspects of my childhood. So I just, after that film, I just felt that urge to maybe make sense of it. I didn't set out to write a piece, but I just started writing something on my blog, and it turned out to be like a 2,000 or 3,000 word thing. And yeah, that's when I realized that, and it really was cathartic. And I was young then. I wasn't half the writer I am right now. I wasn't half the thinker I am right now. So for me, it really unlocked a lot of areas in my head and in my heart that I didn't know I had, and that it's possible to express yourself through the medium of film. Even though you're writing about someone else's art, it can be your own art as well. That's when I woke up to that. And I guess that Nebraska piece got me thinking about if there is an alternative kind of culture writing, of cinema writing, that maybe people will be more accepting of. And, fortunately, I found sort of editors who believed in that as well. And so they helped me with getting the column sort of published a year or two later. So, but yeah, that was the film that started it all.
That's amazing. That's it's such an interesting, and I think that's a real, that really relates to sort of the core of why we go to the cinema as well. Is we go there to learn these things, and we go to not every single film. We don't want to necessarily have as there's plenty of a variety of things that we can feel when we go to the cinema.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of gold, isn't it? That's the stuff we're hunting.
I guess it's the purest kind of feeling, right? As you said, it's why we go to the movies. It's the purest kind of feeling when a film, you feel like it's directly speaking to you, or it's speaking to you in a way no other human being can. And you feel like you're part of the film, but at the same time, you know very well that there's a screen that sort of separates you from what's happening, and it's fiction and it's real. And I guess I've always found that divide very fascinating. I'm very proud of the essays I've sort of compiled or written over the years about this. This particular column or this particular theme of life meeting the movies, because I really do get very emotionally sort of exhausted while writing them. And it's also the most rewarding I feel at the end of every other fortnight. And it's not the kind of feeling reviewing gives me, or say writing more academic pieces about cinema gives me. It's that writing that, and I'm fortunate to have even reached a stage where I can actually write something like that without worrying about whether it's going to get published, whether people are going to read about it, because that's the last thing on my mind most of the time. It's just because I need to do it, and it makes me a better person, and by extension, sometimes a better writer.
Yeah. And what's the latest film that you've sort of encountered that has had that sort of effect on you?
I guess the latest film was After Sun.
Right.
That was in fact the most recent column as well. I actually set about trying to review After Sun, and it very quickly and swiftly turned into one of the columns because of the themes, because of the central sort of because of the central theme of memories, and because I am at a stage of my life as well where I'm always worried about time slipping away with my father or with my parents, and who live sort of in another city. So it just got me really sort of worked up, and I guess that's the and I guess it's also the piece I was most satisfied with at least in the last 2 or 3 months.
Oh yeah, that's a film that's touched many people, and I think it's one of those. It's kind of quite interesting because there's a sort of minor backlash to it. There are people sort of saying, "Oh, I admire it," but it hasn't. It's sort of like, just because it's touched a lot of people, it doesn't have to touch everyone. It's like
absolutely.
It's like the same thing with democracy. You don't have to get everybody to agree with you. You just need 51%. You don't have to win everybody. And in fact, there's something to be said for films which are divisive or even niche, that they have an appeal to certain people. They do it very well, and they're never going to be popular. They're never going to be, I'm looking at a few of those films at the moment, so that's why that's.
Oh yeah, I mean, I always feel like the best kind of divisive films are the ones that you don't feel the need to defend, because you know what it means. You know what it means to you, and you don't really have to debate it, because the other person may not relate to it. It may not work for the other person the same way, and you're totally at peace with that. And that it sort of changed you in a very little way. And I guess I felt the same way about After Sun either, because the funny thing is I watched it twice. The first time I watched it on the big screen, it didn't work for me at all. I just did not get into the film or get the film. Maybe because it was the fourth film I was watching at a film festival in the same day. My mind was a little tired, but then the second time I actually watched it to write about it, it felt like a totally different film, and I felt like a totally different person. So I guess that only reiterates what you're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. It's not very frequent that I rewatch new films, but having said that, one of the reasons I realized that Elvis was one of my favorite films of the year was not because I would put it up there as anything, it was just simply because it was the only film that I watched in Cannes that I was happy to pay to watch again. And so just on the pure entertainment level, I wanted to go in and enjoy that again. And so that was, that was, sometimes I worry as well that I sort of don't detect the divisiveness as much as maybe I should. So, for instance, I watched The Whale and thought that was perfectly fine. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, same here. I watched it, I think, at Tromso itself when we were there, and I guess that's part of it. I don't think you're supposed to look. I don't think we're supposed to enjoy a film or not enjoy a film in direct relationship with the people who are watching it around us, and I guess that's what makes the medium so special, because as you said, I watched Elvis actually on the plane to Norway, and I missed it on the big screen, which I regret. And it is one of my favorite directors, because I still watch his Romeo and Juliet almost every year. And I was a big fan of Moulin Rouge back when I was still very young. It sort of showed me a very different kind of musical, which I didn't know existed before that. I'd only seen conventional musicals. So to see even a film like Elvis on a flight, it hit very differently, and I was supremely entertained as well. And I knew for a fact that it's the kind of film a lot of people will love to look down on, and it's not an sort of a sophisticated or an award season film, which is why I was very happy to see it as part of the list, because I didn't expect that. And at the same time, I'd say it's not like a brilliant film or a life altering film, but as you said, it's something that I really enjoyed in the moment, and given a chance, I'd be happy to watch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. I mean, Rahul, one last question, because you've been very generous with your time, and that's absolutely. I'd love to have you on the podcast in the future to talk some more, because I feel like we're scratching the surface.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I want one last question is that I always ask for a recommended book for our listeners so a film book that you've read that you would like to recommend. It doesn't have to be recent. It can be any film book that you've read and has informed your love of cinema.
I mean, that's the one quirk I forgot to mention at the beginning of the podcast. I'm not actually much of a reader.
Oh no!
I know, and that would make for entirely different and interesting separate podcast, because I'm one of those people who haven't grown up reading. My father is a big reader, and I guess he tried to force so many books on me, so much literature on me while I was growing up, that I totally went the opposite way, and I stopped reading very early when I was in college or something. And it's not like it's not a deliberate decision. It's just I'd rather watch stuff, and I'd rather figure stuff out on my own than it's almost a personal quirk of sorts. And whatever little I do end up reading is when I'm traveling or when I'm on a flight, and it's mostly fiction. I'm to date, I've not read a film book. And,
oh my God.
I know.
You have to go through the list of this podcast and get some recommendations then. Because
I will. If I have to start my education, I know where to start it. But again, I feel like most of the time I feel like that 24 hours in a day, and I'm spending 15 hours watching stuff.
Right.
And I'm
fair enough.
When will I read stuff? So
what about other film critics? Are there other film critics that you read on a sort of like?
Yeah, I do read a lot of. So I don't read books, but I read a lot of criticism. I read a lot of in general. I read a lot of culture from all over the world. I think like everyone else, and I read a lot of. I think one of my favorite critics is Anthony Lane and A.O. Scott. And I grew up reading a lot of their pieces. Of course, like everyone else, I grew up reading Roger Ebert as well. But I was very in the documentary on him a couple of years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, I don't know, which was called Life Itself. I think that that documentary on its own, rather than his criticism itself, had convinced me to take my craft a little more seriously. So it was the documentary that changed the way I wanted to look at my job and the way I look at films. And so for me that was a very big deal. I do read a lot of reviews from all over the world as well, because it helps me keep in touch with a lot of titles and with a lot of film festival movies as well that we don't get to watch a lot here.
So where's your next film festival? What are you going to next?
I wish I had an answer to that, because Norway happened, Tromsø happened totally fortuitously, and it was because a lot of people stepped in to help. But the thing is, we don't travel a lot to film festivals from here, because it's more of a financial thing, because not a lot of publications pay for your travel, or you don't earn enough here as a journalist to go to foreign film festivals. So, most of my film festivals are to places that are generous enough to host you. And I guess that's why I've not been to any of the big film festivals like Berlin and Cannes or, Venice or any of those. But I have been to Sundance a couple of times, and I hope to be there back in the future. Because that's the only sort of a big international film festival that I've attended. But having said that, I'd love to attend any of the big film festivals this year. I'm just hoping for a miracle or something.
Yeah, we will. Well, I know Thierry Frémaux listens to the podcast, and he's the festival director of Cannes, so he should come on, Thierry. Come on.
Sure, if you're listening, why not?
I don't think he listens. I'm not sure. Who knows? Who knows? Rahul, listen, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, a real education for me to hear your thoughts.
No, same here.
On your career and your perspective. It's been fascinating. So thanks a lot, Rahul.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope to have do a new podcast in the future as well.
So that was my conversation with Rahul. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I certainly thought it was a really informative, a really interesting to just get a different perspective and see things from a different angle, including a geographical one and cultural one and political one. So really appreciate Rahul for talking to me, and hopefully he'll come back on the pod when he's written his book or even before then, and we'll I imagine it feels like an ongoing conversation, which I'm really happy to continue. I've already thanked Elliot and Ali, but I can do so again. But most of all, I'd like to thank you for listening. Remember, if you can spread the word, that would be much appreciated. Writers on Film will be back next week with a new guest, and I'll see you then. Take care, listener.
$1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps to build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.